Thank you very much. And I am representing the Legislature and Governance Commission, a report that went to the plenary of the National Policy Conference. And we did look at 15 issues that I'm just going to give highlights and then a few of the recommendations, mainly the key highlighted recommendations. One is the policy context in which the debate took place in the commissions and to the plenary. The second one, we reflected on the previous decisions of the 53rd conference of the ANC as to how far we have moved in the implementation. Third is the consolidating political power. That power is there to be contested, but power is also there to be consolidated. Four, we then looked at the macro configuration of government. Going forward, how are we going to structure our government? The fifth was the capacity and capability of government. 6, government planning, implementation and performance was looked at and debated and engaged on. 7, managing municipal spaces for socio-economic transformation. 8, we looked at the Legislature, National Assembly, the NCOP, the 9 provincial legislatures. 9, we looked at the institutions supporting democracy. 10, the governance of the SOEs. And 11, local government as a whole, both the structure and the systems of local government. 12 was the demarcation matters. 13 was the traditional leadership. And 14, job creation, and as far as community works, community development workers and others. And then the last was on fighting corruption. The highlights on all those issues that we looked at, on the policy context, the conference and looked at the main goal of the state transformation, that we reaffirmed the position that we are building a developmental state that provides effective basic services with capabilities to take forward a far-reaching agenda of national economic development, whilst at the same time placing people and their involvement at the center of this process. So that was the main context in which we looked at the policy context. The second one was the building of a capable and developmental state at all 3 spheres of government, and through measures such as strengthening the political institutions, ensuring the state plays an important role in driving the economy and society, building an effective integrated planning and service delivery systems, ensuring civil society works with the state in achieving these goals, strengthening and professionalization of the public service administration, particularly top management and the delivery sectors, and building the educational feeder system to produce a developmental skills, technical and professional personnel. On the previous decisions, which is number 2, we then looked at what were the resolutions that we took there, and quite a number of them are in the process of being implemented, save for a few, particularly the future of the province, and still a sticky and outstanding issue that we have not yet rationalized the number of provinces in South Africa. And then the conference said we need to come up with a deadline, and then we are proposing going to the conference in December, specific processes that will have to be underlined and then so forth. So, and therefore we then looked at quite a number of issues: the role of the district municipalities, the differentiated local government models, more effective governance in the municipalities, strengthening the ward committees as part of community participation, a review of the local government financial system as a whole, a review of the role, scope and composition of the Municipal Development Board, strengthening systems to detect and act against corruption, and the strengthening of the local government system in general. On the consolidation of powers, just 4 key issues. I will not go through all of them. The Commission looked at the caliber of the cadres that we are deploying at this level of local government in particular and in government in general, to ensure that commitment of serving our people and the performance while in office is achieved. We also agreed on a clear, accountable framework that needs to be developed for cadres operating in the state and which needs to be followed and be implemented. The accountability framework must include provisions for enforcement and consequence management where cadres do not perform as expected. The ANC constitution specifies that 50% gender representation amongst public office bearers needs to be achieved. Proposal for a 40% youth representation was made as a recommendation going to the December conference, and then the ANC Youth League was very emphatic on that they needed to have that number of young people coming into that. And also they called for the 60% continuity of MPs, MPLs, and councillors needs to be reviewed, that the number 60% is rather too big. So we'll be engaging and debating on a recommendation that the branches will further debate and then bring a resolution around. That the ANC must establish an electoral commission in order to ensure transparent in the selection and capacitation processes of people who are to assume leadership and deployment, whether in local government, in the provinces, also in the national space, to improve the quality, the integrity, and the sustainability of the selection and election public representatives, so that the systems that we were working on had created certain problems, and then therefore we need then to begin to look at the model that can really be a system that cannot be manipulated, that will always give the results of what the people want in a person, and then those people that are chosen by the communities be respected by our organization as the candidates that will then stand. It was therefore agreed that a policy paper needs to be developed, ensuring therefore that there's a model that the ANC will follow going forward. On the consolidation of power, again, we also looked at the professionalization and the capacity of a party that is modern, whilst retaining the characterization of the ANC as a liberation movement, but we're also a party that contests elections, win elections, and that needs to be capacitated at all given time, including use of mass media mobilization, regular polling, and electioneering, so that we have an institution in the ANC created for that. That where the ANC is in power, it should exercise that power in ways that anticipate future electoral contestations. That, by the way, power is there to be contested, so you are not in power forever. At all given time, when you are in power, use it in such a way that it includes also exposing divisions and the moral bankruptcy of the opposition. It should also aim to build the state organs under its control with sufficient institutional resilience to continue under future electoral configurations. Where the outcome of the election is not to the ANC or not an outright majority, it must consider entering into strategic governance partnerships, which we call them coalition arrangements. And our starting point for such arrangement must be the ANC alliance, and more broadly with the Congress movement or with parties that almost are in the same line with us. Unless such do not exist, obviously, the formula will then be engaged around that issue. That issue of the coalition arrangements must be part of the policy of the ANC. The ANC must also build its internal capacity to give policy direction to its elected representatives, as well as creating a monitoring mechanisms. In this regard, the ANC must ensure that the creation of a governance support team whose aim is to work with deployed cadres to ensure the ANC policies are monitored and implemented, particularly from the headquarters of the ANC, so that all the people that are deployed must then be monitored continuously, not only towards the elections. That legislation on state funding for political parties must be amended and should apply to all spheres, not only at the national level, but also in the provinces and also at the municipality level, so that the committee that has been appointed in Parliament currently to investigate the notion of the state party funding must also look at the other spheres of government. But also within that context of the party funding, a legislation must provide for the establishment of funding of political foundations to undertake research, policy development, political education, as well as hosting and management of party archives. On the macro configuration of government, we were looking at the presidency in the main as the strategic center of governance. and a central driver of the developmental state, and the following core functions must form part of that new center that needs to be created in government. One, the state macro policy and planning must be centered in the presidency. Two, budget and resource allocation and prioritization must also be located within the presidency. Thirdly, cooperative governance, the IGRs and other forms of legislations that exist must also be centered there. For the public services, the type of services that is being rendered from wherever it's been rendered, including the frontline offices, must also be managed and coordinated there. And the last is the performance and management thereof. And the other proposal on the cooperative macro configuration is the cooperative governance legislation that must be enacted to deal with the efficacy of national and provincial government support to local government and provinces, harmonize of powers and functions of provinces and local government, and a framework for accountability of provincial and local government. Because in some areas there's contestation of space, we need to clean that particular environment in terms of the roles and the functions clearly. That a presidential commission must be established between now and before December to review the powers, the functions, and the number of provinces that needs to be established. This provincial commission ought to be announced with clear timeframes so that by the December conference, when the ANC meets, we should be by then having announced that provincial commission, which will then help us in then dealing with a number of provinces. That the Legislature and Governance Committee should analyze the mandate overlaps and recommend consolidating and configuration of functional mandates and roles between entities and departments. On the capacity and the capability of the state, we looked at quite a number of issues, but I'll only deal with three of them. Is the transformation and the modernization of the public administration, should deal comprehensively with the human resource development, capacity building, and the professionalization of the public administration and the establishment of the necessary systems and processes. The second one was the National School of Government should play a central coordinating role in capacitating employees in all spheres to achieve the goals of the NDR and advise on success planning and career development. NDR stands for the National Democratic Revolution. Then the last, that the Office of Standards and Compliance must be established to set and oversee implementation of uniform norms and standards in public administration in all three spheres in order to move towards a single public administration, something that has been evading us. On government planning and implementation and performance, we will just highlight three issues. That the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation must be strengthened and transformed into a department for national policy and planning, focusing on macro policy coherence and planning, policy impact assessment, resource prioritization linked to the budget strategy, mandate paper, and a special planning. All of it must then be in that, as those issues that we said needs to be at the presidency level, they'll be coordinated by this department. That the IDPs should remain the central planning tool in which all spheres of government participate to address alignment of planning, both bottom and top down, alignment of planning cycles and budget cycles, especially with respect to local government, must be achieved. Planning cycles must also align with the ANC planning and evaluation from the Makgotlas of the government. On the managing municipal spaces for radical socio-economic transformation, the ANC must play a leading role in driving the integrated urban development framework. As we know that South Africa is fast urbanizing at the rate of 60% currently, which is likely to go to 70%. But that needs to be governed by principles of reversing the apartheid spatial patterns, ensure resilience and quality of human settlements, and sustainability and efficiency of the overall system. That we have identified the top 100 urban settlements as well as their rural hinterlands that needs to be prioritized to achieve the goals of integration, inclusion, and economic growth, thereby creating a more equitable spatial economy and decentralization of the communities. The overriding special challenge is overcoming the legacy of apartheid, densifying and integrating urban and rural development nodes and activities corridors. This requires government departments and spheres to work together in a new ways that achieve a coordinated impact. On the legislature's two issues in the main, there are quite a number of activities, that the constitutional role of the NCOP must be reviewed with the intention to strengthen the NCOP. And I think the 20-year review of the NCOP has informed that indeed that strengthening of the NCOP is now required. Mechanism must be developed to ensure that the NCOP plays a strategic role in articulating provincial and local government matters in the House. Ways of strengthening the representativity of the provinces must be engaged on, including looking at the recommendation from SALGA that is requesting voting rights at the committee system of the NCOP and also voting rights in the NCOP as a mechanism that can then be looked at if the rules do not provide such, be looked at, and if it's not the rules, it's the constitution, to also look at the constitutional amendments to give that effect of the voting rights for a collective organized local government in the NCOP, in particular on matters relating to local government. And then that the National House of Traditional Leaders should also be considered on a non-voting engagements and a mechanism so that issues arising from the House of the National House of Traditional Leaders could also find space and expression in the NCOP, in particular those that have legislative impact on the sector itself. That the position of the Speaker of Parliament should be created as an overall political institution head of Parliament. Currently, we have the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chairperson of the NCOP. We don't have the Speaker of Parliament. And it's one of the three arms that do not have a single head. And therefore, there is a strong recommendation that came from the Commission that then we needed to create such an institution and an office to look on those issues that are not in the joint sittings and those issues that are independently in the various houses, they will remain as is. But when we come to the national, particularly international matters, who are affiliated to the IPU and other institutions of parliaments all over the world, they always say the Speaker and Parliament. They never say the Speaker of the NA and NCOP. So there's a very strong recommendation on that particular issue of the creation. The majority of the chief whips in Parliament should be, the majority party chief whip in Parliament should be accorded the necessary political and institutional recognition, so that the chief whip office should be an institutional body of Parliament and no longer a party matter. And that similar arrangement should also be focused on in the provinces, that the institutionalization of the office in the provinces, legislature be done, and also in the municipalities, so that all institutions of chief whip's office should be institutionalized. And those are the areas that we just in the highlights looked at. And then on the issues of the institutions supporting democracy, the Commission agreed that the ad hoc committee on the report on the ISDs, which was known as the Kada Asmal report, must be expedited in terms of its implementation and processing. That the rationalization of the ISDs and establishment of the unitary human rights body should be investigated by Parliament, including consequent constitutional and other amendments. Lastly, that Parliament must review the regulations, the policies, and the laws regarding the accountability and reporting of the ISDs to Parliament. On the governance of the SOEs, just 2 or 3 issues, that the multiplicity of the SOEs, including municipal entities, and their functional alignment with the departments and accounting authorities must be. The ANC must focus on the mandate and role of the SOEs and make necessary inputs and policy guides to the Provincial SOE Council. Government must audit the mandates of the major SOEs and ensure alignment with the developmental objectives of the state. That the ANC government must strengthen the oversight mechanisms on SOEs. The ANC in Parliament must take the lead in ensuring this sector is properly managed and is also monitored. A policy paper on the repositioning of the SOEs as a catalyst of socio-economic transformation must be developed, including ways in which they can enhance local economies. This must take into consideration the Presidential Review Commission recommendations as already in place. On local government recommendations, just the main ones that I will then engage on, is the alignment of planning cycles and financial years. As you know, that the financial year at national and provincial is 1st of April, and then that of local government is in June. There was a strong recommendation that the alignment must be one, and from national, provincial to local government going forward into the future. And then the second one was that the financial model for local government needs to be comprehensively reviewed in order to align resources with constitutional mandates of governments, and that the equitable share and system of intergovernmental grants should be restructured, take into account the changing settled patterns, poverty, topography, capabilities, and other contexts. Currently, the equitable share is looking at population. Where are the people moving? And then money will then follow the people. And then leaving certain provinces with poverty of infrastructure and all sorts of things. So the request therefore here is to say the equitable share model should then be reviewed to look at all these particular aspects. That local government-owned revenues collection efforts must complement national grants and the equitable share in order to ensure there are no unfunded or underfunded mandates, as is the case at the level of local government. On traditional leaders, our approach on it was that we will be looking at traditional leadership must be incorporated within our understanding of the developmental state. The government policy should take account of and promote cooperative governance with the respect of overlapping jurisdiction between local authorities and traditional authorities with respect to land management. That institutional and practices of traditional leadership must be accorded recognition and respect in line with the provisions of the Constitution, Chapter 12. That the ANC must hold an urgent summit with traditional leaders and other progressive forces to discuss and resolve on the outstanding policy issues. Amongst others, the issues that have been identified by the commissions is the relationship between local government and traditional authorities and their definition of roles and functions. 2, whether they include passage from the interim constitution with regards to functions, roles, and powers of traditional leaders. There's a call that the interim constitution had enough powers that were given to the traditional leaders. We'll be looking at that in the summit too. That the approach to the implementation of SPLUMA, which is the Special Planning Land Utilization Management Act, and the subsidiary provincial legislation along the lines of the development of what Limpopo did cannot be realigned, rather than have a situation where traditional leaders are rejecting SPLUMA, as is the case. That the extent to which the opt-out laws of the traditional cause legislation weakens the traditional leadership should be also be looked at. That the non-voting representation of the House in the traditional leaders in the NCOP be finalized also there. Then lastly, that the relations, the role of the traditional leaders as custodian of land on behalf of their people, and whether land held in trust by state on their behalf should be transferred to the collective ownership of the people currently residing there or using land, and that the conditions of service and allowances be reviewed in total. So it was then agreed that within 60 days, this summit should be held, and then its recommendations to be sent to the provinces, to be sent to the branches, to the alliance structures and other progressive forces, and so that they can make comments, recommendations, and it be finalized at the December conference as a package of resolutions. And then the last 2 then is on the job creation and community works, that the state institution must prioritize job creation opportunities in their procurement program, including filling of all available positions and vacancies in government. Secondly, that the EPWP contractual periods should be extended to avoid frequent instability in employment. That there's a need for better alignment between government departments and spheres in terms of management of the community development workers and the community work programs needs to be looked at and then be realigned. And that accredited training in public employment programs is crucial to their successful implementation, so that those people that goes into the program comes back as better individuals. On fighting corruption, just 2 or 3 issues, that the ANC needs to lead in the moral regeneration of society, and this program must be adequately funded and accounted for. Secondly, that the ANC needs to mobilize communities and societies around issues of corruption and position itself in a leadership role with respect to culture of exposing corruption and rewarding whistleblowers. Lastly, that the ANC government and leadership must implement a program to prevent irregular or fraudulent practices, including ethics, monitoring, transparency in procurement decisions, checks and balances on oversight mechanisms, the disbearing of both public servants and public representatives at all levels from doing business with the state, and the introduction of probity and lifestyle audits on all our public representatives, on all our officials in government, so that we will then begin to ensure that we cap corruption. Thank you very much.